The WHO remains concerned over the prevailing humanitarian situation in the Ethiopian region of Tigray. Former independent presidential candidate in the Gambia calls on President Barrow to prioritize the security sector reform agenda and also tackle the high cost of living in the country. And leaders of the Arab League determined to put a stop to the prolonged political crisis in Libya. Well, this and more coming your way on The World Today. You are watching the World Today News Bulletin on Eyeafrica TV, and many thanks for joining us. I am Amadou Kante, and now the news in details. Now, in its latest health emergency updates around the globe, the World Health Organization expresses concern over the humanitarian situation in Tigray, the rising cases of Ebola outbreak in Uganda, and the prevalent effects of climate change. The WHO board said that the crisis in Tigray remains catastrophic, as this week marks 2 years since the siege of Ukraine region began. And details of that in this report by Mariama Cham.
The World Health Organization says it's concerned about the increasing number of Ebola cases in Uganda, climate change, which is fueling cholera outbreaks, and the humanitarian crisis looming in Tigray, where the Ethiopian region has been locked in a 2-year conflict with the federal government in Addis Ababa. The Tigray conflict is one of the world's worst ongoing conflicts, but it's been largely ignored as international attention is fixed on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The severe humanitarian crisis unfolding since November 2020 has left more than 5 million people facing starvation, according to the World Food Programme. WHO boss Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said that the regions of Afar and Amhara are also affected by the conflict. Dr. Tedros described the siege in the region as the worst humanitarian crisis in the world.
However, the humanitarian situation in Tigray remains catastrophic. As I have said before, the siege of 6 million people by Ethiopian and Eritrean forces is the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. Since the beginning of the siege, food, medicine, and other basic services have been weaponized. It has now been more than 2 months since the last humanitarian aid reached Tigray. But even before that, the aid reaching Tigray was a trickle, nowhere near enough to meet the needs. WHO continues to call for unfettered humanitarian access for the millions of people who are in dire need. And we continue to call on the international community to give the crisis in Tigray the right attention. The only solution to the situation remains peace. And we hope that the talks now taking place in South Africa will lead to a peaceful and enduring resolution.
On the Ebola outbreak in Uganda, Tedros said there are now 130 confirmed cases, 21 probable cases, 43 confirmed deaths, and 21 probable deaths. He added that Mubende remains the most affected district. However, cases have recently increased in 2 neighboring districts and 17 cases have been confirmed in Kampala. WHO continues to work closely with the government of Uganda and its partners to respond to the outbreak and urges a strengthened global response and increased donor investment. To support the response, WHO on Tuesday released an additional $5.7 million from its contingency fund for emergencies, in addition to an earlier $5 million it released previously. Also addressing journalists on Ebola, Dr. Ibrahima Sose Fall, Assistant Director General of WHO's Emergency Response, acknowledged the Ugandan government's leadership in scaling up the responses.
If you look at some indicator like the average from onset of symptom in the community to isolation is around 5 days. We need to make sure that this is reduced. And one of the important points is to make sure that we are not missing any probable cases, and all actions that need to be taken around the probable cases are taken. This will help to control all transmission chains. So positive improvement, positive development, but we need to make sure that we continue until we know that all the transmission chains are identified and stopped.
While poverty and conflict are major triggers of cholera, climate change is a growing threat. WHO said climate change presents an additional layer of complexity and creates the conditions for cholera outbreaks to explode. This also is reiterated by the WHO chief, Dr. Tedros.
Around the world, climate change is fueling outbreaks of cholera and dengue and increasing the risks of new pathogens emerging with epidemic and pandemic potential. Climate change exacerbates disease and malnutrition, which have a compounding effect. Sick people are more likely to be malnourished, and malnourished people are more likely to get sick and die. The climate crisis is a health crisis.
Temperature, salinity, rainfall, and plankton have proven to be important factors in the ecology of Vue cholera, influencing the transmission of the disease in those regions of the world where the human population relies on untreated water as a source of drinking water. Cholera is an extremely serious disease that can cause severe acute watery diarrhea with severe dehydration. Reporting for Eyeafrica News, I am Yahya Jammeh.
And coming back home, Papa Fall, former independent presidential candidate, has called on the Gambian leader, President Adama Barrow, to take security and the spiraling cost of living very seriously. He urged President Barrow to also put security sector reform at the top of his agenda, as the citizens need to feel safe and secured in their own country. Mafuji Sise has the details in this report.
It is not a secret that security has apparently weakened with the advent of the Adama Barrow presidency in the Gambia. Many have attributed this unfortunate situation to broadly two main issues. First, a sense of demoralization by members of the security services who have had watched some of their colleagues dragged before the country's Truth, Reconciliation, Reparations Commission, TRRC, to be grilled on alleged human rights abuses committed during the rule of ex-President Jammeh. Secondly, there seems to be a new sense of freedom felt by Gambians which is leading many, especially the youth, into reckless and undesirable behaviors which has occasioned many premature deaths in the country, mainly due to knife crime. But that aside, there is also the issue of food insecurity, a major cause for concern for most Gambian households. The average salary in the country is not able to sustain most salaried workers who, in most instances, have many mouths to feed. This is not lost on Papa Fall, a veteran of the U.S. Army and a former presidential candidate. Papa Fall is of the view that President Barrow, far from fulfilling his promises to Gambians for a better life, erroneously surrounds himself with incompetent people.
The first 5 years, according to many and according to him, he feels that perhaps he was being undermined by those who was in his leadership. So we bought into that and perhaps got him endorsed. We campaigned very hard for him.
The price of basic food commodities are skyrocketing almost daily, and it seems the Gambia government is out of ideas as to how to tackle these issues. For Papa Fall, this should be a major cause for concern for any incumbent.
Because everywhere we go, people are complaining. The standard of living, the cost of living is very high. The people's buying parity is very low. What you used to buy for 100 last year or 2 years will now cost $300 or $400. So it is really not sustainable for the Gambian people. The electricity, the roads, the healthcare, you name it, everything is not working.
After President Barrow secured a second 5 years mandate some 10 months ago, there was the feeling that perhaps he will make the necessary changes in personnel and begin to deliver on the goods. But for Papa Fall, President Barrow simply cannot do any better, as he already had ample time to make the necessary changes if he wanted.
In leadership, in governance, 10 months is a lifetime, because what you can do in 10 months to show people that you understand their concerns and you are working to address it. In 10 months, that can happen. When people see that corruption is high, waste is out of control, there are no consequences for corrupt behaviors, the lack of resources for security personnel to be able to protect the citizens. These are all mounting things that the government, Barrow's government, should pay attention to. And I hope that he will pay attention to, because time is running out.
The recent rise in violent crimes, the high cost of living and poverty is driving many Gambians into despair. Papa Fall believes there is a limit to what Gambians may be ready to tolerate.
Couple that with the high cost of living, people are now can only take it for so long. So for me, my supporters who voted for Barrow are now turning to me to say, you told us to vote for Barrow. Now look at what is going on. I usually don't have anything to say. I don't know what to tell them because, you know, it's. I think that Barrow's words should be his bound. He promised the Gambian people that he's going to change. He promised the Gambian people that he is going to address their concerns. And I think that he should address those concerns by reducing expenditure, government expenditure, and then boosting public spending for people, especially the environment of people's living, the livelihood, the cost of food and fuel and medicine. If you spend money, subsidies on those things, you are not throwing money away. You are actually helping people.
Official police records have shown that the vast majority of the active criminals are foreign nationals who are capitalizing on the weak state of the security apparatus in the Gambia to commit crime. Mafoy Sise, Eyeafrica News.
And elsewhere in the continent, now despite the growing tensions in Ukraine, Egyptian authorities are preparing to resume grain importation from the European country to meet up local demands. More than 10 million of the 21 tons of wheat imported to the North African country come from Russia and Ukraine. The Arab nation recently inked a bailout package with the International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, amid the prevailing economic crisis. Let's have more details of that in this report.
Egypt consumes 21 million tons of wheat a year. Over 12 million of the wheat is imported mainly from both Ukraine and Russia. But officials in Cairo have downplayed the impact of the recent breakdown of the UN-brokered grain deal between the two major suppliers.
Up till now, the effect is not highly pronounced. There is a trend that it is going to be increased a little bit. But how much, it depends on the handling from the other sources. And as I said, the reserves up till now, we have more than 5 months reserves, which are very, very safe and very good.
Egypt has just signed off a $2 billion loan from the International Fund for Agricultural Development to cover the hike in global commodity bills. Authorities have also adopted a strategy to ensure the availability of its strategic commodities.
Egypt now imports from 22 nations without total dependence on Russia and Ukraine, as was the case before the crisis. We had a good harvest season in the last few months, and we also built numerous silos to prevent wastage during transport and storage, which used to account for 30% of production. All these measures are aimed at reducing risk.
The government is also considering cultivating crops in African neighboring countries to be sent back to the local market.
It is a good option because there are huge plots of arable land, and it depends on rain rather than irrigation. Therefore, expenses are much lower as we already have scarce water resources. However, the results are for the medium and long term and not short term.
In the meantime, the North African country is bracing for positive news on the resumption of the Russian-Ukrainian grain deal.
And that report there is coming from the Egyptian capital, Cairo. Moving on, more than 200 members of the African parliaments are meeting in South Africa to deliberate on issues affecting the continent and its people with a view to promote African voices on the global development agenda. Now, the African parliamentarians were also encouraged to consider in their discussion the Continental Free Trade Agreement and contribute to promote the rule of law in the continent. Of course, the parliament was also addressed by the Commonwealth Secretary General for the first time since its formation. Here's more details of that in this report.
The Pan-African Parliament was established to ensure full participation of Africans in the economic development and integration of the continent. The Parliament is also intended as a platform for people from all African states to be involved in discussions and decision-making on the problems and challenges facing the continent. A total of 257 members of Parliament are meeting to deliberate on issues affecting the African continent.
Our aim is to ensure that the voice of African people also finds its expression in the global development agenda. The interests of Africa should always find space on the global discussion table.
Speaking on behalf of South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, Justice and Correctional Services Minister Ronald Lamola implored these parliamentarians to pay close attention to key projects such as the African Continental Free Trade Area as they deliberate.
The Pan-Africanist Parliament has an important mandate of contributing to the strengthening of the culture of democracy, good governance, and the rule of law in the continent. The African Continental Free Trade Area is also one of the tools at our disposal to contribute to greater integration. But it will require the finalization of the harmonization of standards across the continent and the streamlining of our supply chains, amongst others.
For the first time since its establishment, the Parliament was addressed by the Commonwealth Secretary General.
This Parliament has made it clear that the issues we face, including those on trade and development, are similar to the Commonwealth and similar to our connectivity agenda.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was also expected to be a guest at this session, but was unable to make it.
Well, parliamentarians from different African countries, or from all African countries, are currently meeting in South Africa to discuss on issues affecting the continent. And from the report there in South Africa, we now take a break and come back shortly. Stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back. This is Eyeafrica TV, and you are watching the World Today News Bulletin coming to you live from our studios in Banjul. And once again, many thanks for joining us. And let's now look at the rest of the stories. Now, the spokesperson of the Alliance for Patriotic Reorientation and Construction, APRC, Dudu Jah, has said that the Gambia government's plans and developments cannot be seen by the people without effective communication. Strong communication from a government creates trust in its citizens. This hope is that the trust will then inspire citizens to become involved in the national development goals of their country. And as far as the former ruling party's PRO is concerned, this is what the Adama Barrow-led government lacks: the ability to effectively communicate with the very people it is governing. And Yahya Jammeh has the details of that in this report.
The relationship between government and the citizenry is a two-way street. The government needs to hear from the citizens and likewise the citizens from government. An effective communication strategy is thus fundamental in bridging the divide between a government and its citizens. Separate from political discourse, it allows the public to gain access to relevant information and represents an avenue for citizens to engage with their public administrators on issues that matter most to them. But on many occasions here in the Gambia, the reverse is the case, as the government usually prefers to sit on much sought after information only to release it when pressured by the citizens. Duduja believes that a transparent governance structure which encourages dialogue between the government and the people can only make the people more appreciative of government plans and actions and thereby gain their trust and confidence.
What's lacking is effective communication. I always talk about it. If you're doing a lot and without getting the public informed, people will definitely not see the action that's on the ground. So it's simultaneous, very important that you're action oriented and you communicate effectively. That will put people in line and also try to put them in the know about happenings of their projects and whatever developments they have for us. But if they keep it to themselves, no matter how hard you work, people won't see it.
The APRC spokesperson goes on to say that dialogues, including press conferences, are important avenues where those in authority are quizzed on pertinent matters of state, and they help in keeping the public well informed about the happenings in government.
Always advocate for press conferences. It's important that people ask the relevant questions and you clarify, beside giving them the important information that you have. That would help to keep people out of the loop, the speculations, all these attacks, the unnecessary statements and propaganda that are happening. I believe it is government that can end it, and I believe they have people competent enough who can do so.
A government communicates to inform the public about national plans, public services, security situations, and opportunities, and to give general direction to people as a nation. And insofar as the Barrow-led government is concerned, its manners of communicating to citizens needs to be greatly improved. The government is usually reactive to issues only after massive public criticisms. In most instances, when it does try to communicate, it does so appallingly bad. Reporting for Eyeafrica News, I am Yahya Jammeh.
In other news now, because in their latest meeting convened in the Algerian capital Algiers, leaders of the Arab League have called for an end to the long-standing conflict in Libya. Foreign intervention in the crisis was among the issues discussed by the leaders as they urged Libyan authorities to hold general election in a bid to curtail the prolonged war. Libya has been engulfed in political crisis since the ousting and subsequent killing of its former leader Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. Here's more details of that in this report.
Ending the Libyan crisis was among the main issues Arab leaders discussed during their summit in Algiers. It's the first meeting the UN-endorsed president of the Libyan Presidency Council, Mohammed Menfi, attends. Menfi asked the Arab League's support to evacuate all foreign fighters in Libya and to stop foreign interventions in Libya's domestic affairs.
There are numerous involved parties in the Libyan crisis. There are big gaps in the stances of some of the Arab countries. Algeria has a certain stance towards the Libyan Western government rather than the East. Egypt and the Gulf countries have different stances. Moreover, the issue in Libya is no longer in Libyans or Arabs' hands. That's why, unfortunately, it's too complicated to resolve.
While some Arab League member states support rival factions in Libya, there appears to be an agreement over one issue. All heads of states in Algeria urged Libyans to hold their general elections as soon as possible. The only way out, they say, that could end the 11-year-long conflict.
Everyone agrees that the solution in Libya must be through elections, but at the same time, we must support Libyan factions in the east, west or south to help them accomplish that political achievement. This is a role that the Arab Summit must support, but at the same time, Libyans themselves must want that.
Libyans announced multiple dates to hold their parliamentary and presidential elections, but all attempts have failed so far. Division in Libya is once again growing. Two governments run different regions in the oil-rich nation. Both have armed forces supporting them.
Moreover, rival Libyan factions remain adamant to ban certain figures from the east and the west of Libya from running in the elections. That unchanged approach has so far managed to cancel the elections rather than change those who intend to run.
And from the report in Algeria, now on to our final story, because the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, revealed that the Ukraine war has forced up to 14 million people to flee their homes since February 24, when the war began. He said that this at a briefing with the UN Security Council on Wednesday. Moses Imendi has the details in this report.
The loss of life, the overwhelming infrastructural damages, and the hardships unleashed on world economies dominate news headlines as the thorough effects of the Ukraine war. But the outflow it spurred means a refugee crisis has also been created. The outflow has left Europe with no other option than to deal with a refugee influx. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, told the United Nations Security Council on Wednesday that the 14 million people forced from their homes represents the fastest and largest displacement witnessed in decades.
The Russian invasion of Ukraine has driven the fastest and largest displacement witnessed in decades. Some 14 million people have been forced from their homes since the 24th of February. Ukrainians are about to face one of the world's harshest winters in extremely difficult circumstances. Humanitarian organizations have dramatically scaled up their response, but much more must be done, starting with an end to this senseless war.
Service as President of the Council for the month of October.
That it is not only Ukraine where conflict has driven people from their homes. In the past 12 months alone, UNHCR has responded to 37 emergencies around the world. 37. Yet the other crises are failing to capture the same international attention, outrage, resources, action.
He added that the way Ukrainian refugees have been treated should not be an exception but a norm. The UN and humanitarian agencies are forcing that new fighting in the east and south, Moscow's intensified targeting of power plants and other infrastructure, the approaching winter and fears of a nuclear attack could drive even more Ukrainians to flee their homes in the coming months.
And displacement is becoming increasingly complex. New factors are forcing people to flee, intersecting with traditional drivers of displacement, especially the climate emergency. I fear that without more attention and much greater financing for prevention, adaptation, and development and governance support, tensions, frustrations, competition will grow and spark wider conflict with deadly consequences, including displacement.
Diplomatic skill with which they conducted the Council's business.
The suffering, loss, and despair of 103 million uprooted people, and of many more, which my colleagues and I witness every day, Mr. President, are not the fantasy of an idealistic humanitarian worker. They're very, very real. Allow them to be a humble but compelling call to action.
The High Commissioner called for political solutions from the Security Council. Ukrainian refugees are granted freedom of movement across the Schengen space. Poland received more refugees than any other country, with nearly 1.5 million Ukrainians registered as refugees. More than 450,000 are registered in the Czech Republic, and smaller numbers have gone to other European countries. including Bulgaria, Slovakia, Romania, and Hungary. Moses Imendi, Eyeafrica News.
And that report by Moses Imendi on the impact of the Ukrainian war brings us to the end of this news edition. But for more details on this and other stories, as always, as ever, you can visit on our website on Eyeafrica.tv. But for now, many thanks for the privilege of your company. Thanks for watching, stay safe, and do have a pleasant evening. Bye for now.